Judy, thank you so much for joining us today. We have Cait and I here with you today so that we can talk with each other for our students a little bit about what spirituality integrated into equine assisted services will look like. We really wanted to have the discussion because spirituality in various forms plays such a big role in equine assisted services. And I think more and more as time goes on. And I really appreciate you being willing to sit down and talk with us a little bit about it. I know this isn't a live conversation. I still am going to speak to this piece about just really honoring everybody's vulnerability that they're coming to the table with today and recognizing that speaking about spirituality or religion, whether those two things be very close together or very far apart, is a pretty vulnerable thing. And so being willing to do this is something that I treasure and appreciate. And I know Cait and everybody at Carroll does as well. So thank you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, from across the world.
Yes, from still, I'm hoping still sounds like maybe sunny Australia.
Thank you. Yes, today actually is a beautiful, crisp autumn or fall, as you would call it, day. Just really bright blue sky, and we're going to get to about the mid 20s, which in Fahrenheit is going to get to around 75 or so Fahrenheit. So it's just
Your
beautiful.
winter is nice.
Oh no, we're not in winter yet, but we'll get there. But yes, nothing compared to the extremes of winter that you get in Montana. But look, thank you for inviting me, and I just want to acknowledge that today I'm speaking to you from Gamilaroi country, and I'm on the lands, the unceded lands of the Gamilaroi people, and I honor their ancestors, their elders, and those that are continuing to take care of country here.
Mm.
So yes, I am in New South Wales in Australia, and I have been practicing in the equine assisted space for over 20 years. And I have some deeply held spiritual beliefs, and I have been incorporating spirituality into my equine assisted work to some degree or another, all the time, because it's part of who I am and it informs my relationship with my horses and everything I do. So, yes, I'm excited to talk to you about how that kind of looks and answer any questions that you may have. I do also want to just say that I grew up in Africa. So, I'm an immigrant to Australia. I grew up in Africa. I'm of Celtic heritage primarily. And I've learned and been shaped by Africa, which is a deeply spiritual place, um, really known as the cradle of humanity. And the land is very sacred there, in my view. And listening to all the stories, of Africa and how she shapes the people and holds the people that, walk on her and live on her, really informed my way of, being in the world and my sort of spirituality, which has been, guided, really informed in nature and by nature, I think I can say.
That resonates. So we have what we ended up preparing is just two questions. The first one is actually kind of a two-parter, but we thought that would give you the most room to kind of speak to what matters the most to you and what doesn't. You can leave out. If you need any clarification, let us know. But we will have Cait jump in with question one.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing your answer, especially just the way that you speak about your ancestry and time and the way that it is a part of your day every day. Okay, so our first question is, what does spirituality mean to you, and how did you come to incorporate it into the services you provide? What does this look like day to day?
That is a lot of big question, isn't it? Um, I guess spirituality for me, means an acknowledgement that there is something greater, than that there is a spiritual energy, or some would describe it, as God, some would describe it as creator, some would describe it as the universe, some would describe it as spirit, some would describe it potentially as higher purpose, higher meaning. But there is something greater than, than we mortals, have, that is shaping the world and that is guiding the world. I guess that's my sort of broad definition of spirituality. I think there's a beauty. There was a lovely piece, if I might just mention it, because it sort of defines a little bit, I think, the way I feel about spirituality and how it kind of ties in with the work. And there's an Ojibwe author who, sadly has passed now, Richard Wagamese, who wrote a lovely piece about spirituality that I just want to quickly read. It says, it occurs to me that the secret of fully being here, walking the skin of this planet, is to learn to see things as though I were looking at them for the first time or the last. Nothing is too small then, too mundane, too usual. Everything is wonder. Everything is magical. Everything moves my spirit, and I am spiritual. And I think
Beautiful.
that kind of sums up my sort of feeling about spirituality far better than I can. Because that's kind of it. I'm a practicing animist, and animism, is a belief that is common in a lot of traditional indigenous wisdoms, and was common in my ancestors, that everything is alive, everything has spirit, not just humans, but all the land, trees, mountains, the oceans, the stars, animals, of course, non-human animals, I mean, but everything has spirit and everything is alive. So, be it a rock, or be it an ant, or be it a bird, or be it the breeze, there is spirit moving in it, and there is something divine in that. And so that's, the animistic view of the world. And I guess that's, really my belief system and the way that I practice. So whenever I'm working, with the horses, and clients, the horses, as those of us who do work with horses know, do some extraordinary things, bring something magical that we can't quite quantify. Science is, and research is, kind of giving us a base for a lot of what, happens in the work, the neuroception, the what's happening with cortisol, what's happening with the nervous system, the regulation, the attunement, all these things that we can now, that we kind of knew, but now there is some proof, and evidence base behind it. But as everything that is magical in the world, science can't prove everything. And one of the things about having faith, whether it's a spiritual kind of faith or whether it's a formal religious faith, is a belief in something that cannot be proven, and something that is not there, that we kind of cannot see, but we feel, something that we just know inside of ourselves that feels true.
I like,
So,
oh, sorry.
no, no, go ahead.
It made me think about uh, just the bits and pieces of how spirituality has touched my life, but even my professional career. And something that I really appreciated, you're speaking a lot about faith, and this relationship and attunement. And I come from an attachment-based, relational-based background of psychotherapy, but something that sticks out to me, and I want to say it was one of the they were a part of the spiritual programming, but they talked about this idea of oftentimes, yeah, it has to be these big things that we have faith in. And they made the example of, well, you demonstrate faith every day. You go to sleep at night not knowing what will happen the next morning. But yeah, just hearing you talk about that, of those that faith piece of like, yeah, it can be that simple small act of going to sleep can be a spiritual thing, or demonstrate
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's in the small things, and this is what I think, when we often when we're working with horses and people come to us because something isn't right in their lives, or they, typically, sometimes people just come for a great experience or a novel experience, but mostly people come to us because something feels, wrong in their lives. Something isn't working, whether it's their relationships, with others, their relationship with themselves, how they're communicating, how they're showing up at work, or whether they do have, if you're a mental health practitioner doing this work, whether they're coming to you for some sort of therapeutic purpose. But there's usually, something not quite right, something they're seeking.
Mhm.
And very often, those people feel very alone and very disconnected, And I think this is where I find, my personal sort of beliefs of believing that there is life and spirit and everything around, and looking at those small things and drawing attention to them in nature when working with the horses, just how a bird comes back, or watching a bird feeding, another bird, a baby, if it's coming into spring as it is for you now, that season has passed here, but, the extraordinary amazingness of new life coming forth in spring, and the faith that is there to come forth, that birds just go back, and how they find, and they create these nests, and they just, and the odds can be so against them, and the survival of their chicks, or like little lizards that are so easily picked up by a raven or something, and you think the odds are so against them, but they are so industrious in the way they go about it, and they just have this belief and this, this purpose, this mission to do. And, when you look at things in that way outside of us as humans, and, this can so help us feel better, or, to have a better context or understanding of what is troubling us as a human, and to put it in a different perspective, to see it through a different lens. But it also has this sense of connection, so that, when we can feel so alone, and isolated, if we're not connected to ourselves and not connected, it's hard to connect to other things. One of the things that we find about working with horses is that, being out in nature, which lots of evidence, now says that, that is good for us. It's good for our soul. We're wired to be in nature. We learn better when we're in nature and a natural environment. Our nervous system relaxes. Typically, obviously, there may be circumstances shaping somebody's life where that is not the case. But, we generally are just wired to feel better. So that, that combines, and pointing things out in nature helps people, I think, to feel less alone. Obviously, in the work we do, the presence of a a large horse, and even if your horse is, a small and a miniature version, they're still a big presence. That helps people, as we know, to sort of, um, you know, feel more present and, get more curious. And often that sense of unconditional love, etc., that can be felt with an animal comes into the equation, that help people feel safe, that give them the time to actually, and the space to then actually look at the world with more curiosity. And then if we, can like look at a tree and lean against a tree perhaps, or look at the cycles of the tree and marvel close up at the life that is in the tree, that sense of awe and wonder that can come in, is so good for the human soul and spirit. And this can help people feel connected, just as leaning on a tree can help people feel so supported and connected. And then, from my belief system that, there is life in that tree, that, what is the lesson for us from this tree? Or just how can we share breath? We know that, trees take our carbon dioxide and give us oxygen. So just sharing breath with a tree from the heart as an exercise can be such a connective and grounding experience for somebody. And if they're feeling alone, if they don't have any formal, or spiritual belief, either a formal religious or spiritual belief, and they feel very isolated, then enabling a sense of connection with nature can help them feel less alone and more supported. And so I think this is where our work, helps, because there's a sense of being seen, being witnessed by something else, and a feeling of being less alone. Now, in my work, and with my belief system, if someone is open to that, then I will go much deeper into the sort of maybe the lessons, the wisdom that a tree or a rock has for us, or the energy, what's moving through us. As I said, I grew up in Africa, and there are a lot of African beliefs about ancestors, of course, and ancestors of place that we often feel. We feel the presence of a history, however you want to talk about it, stays in a place, and then particularly in some sacred places, we feel this kind of energy that we can't quite describe in ourselves. And, when we connect to ancestral energy, and Africa, I was taught that a lot of ancestors, come back in the form of, nature spirits, and often our trees are present in trees or in animals. And when if people are open to perhaps considering that, then that, of course, can come into play, and the presence of, if we're doing, I do a fair bit of ancestral work in my practice, where we call in the support of ancestors to sort of help people, and that would just be their own ancestors. And obviously, in some cases, more recent ancestors may be problematic because the relationships weren't good. But going back further down the line to perhaps unknown ancestors, who are still there to support us. Just as for me, the horse's ancestors and everything around, their ancestors are all there. And we can call in this sort of sense of a greater support and a greater presence of unseen characters to create that sense of support and connection for someone who is feeling very isolated or alone. And if people have a very formal religious belief, then of course they have their faith in, God, or Allah, whatever their belief system is, that, they've got that to call on. But many people don't. That's been broken for various reasons, or they weren't brought up with that, their lineage, and their belief system, or they have they were shaped by that, but then in finding themselves found that they rejected that. And, when we do have these transformative, when we learn to be ourselves and shed our conditioned shaping, and we're shaped by everything that, we grow up with, the environment, our family of origin, our culture, our community, our institutions, the belief system, all that all shape us. And if we, then get to a place where we feel like this doesn't feel like who I am, and some people feel that very early, maybe they feel like they were just born into the wrong place, and they reject those systems, and that can be difficult because that can break connections and relationships. And then they're seeking, someone to find a connection with. And lots of people go through this, and they hopefully eventually find a place where they feel they belong, and connections or lineages or belief systems to which they belong. Um, but it can be, such a difficult journey for people, but it's something that really we all go through as we mature, I think, to start to question, is this my belief?
Mhm.
Or is this a belief that I was just, have formed because it was given to me by my parents or, my community? But is it truly mine? And I think those are questions we should all ask ourselves,
Mhm.
to live the life authentically, and to really understand who we are, and to live our own values and our own ethics and so forth. And I could go on and on, but I'll stop.
I could let you go on and on. I think everything you speak to is resonates so
Mhm.
deeply on so many levels. And what I appreciate and what I hope is true is that um, and why I really wanted to speak with you about this, Judy, is because you do, I think, such a beautiful job of speaking to spirituality in a way um, that can be secular and can be religious and feels really open and really respectful of like both sides of that coin. And
Yeah,
yeah, it's just beautiful to hear you speak about all of it.
yeah, the imagery it like provokes in me, speaking of spirituality and religion, is the weaving of a tapestry, and
Mm,
how, yes, it's going to create an end result of a tapestry, a picture, something that is one thing. Um, but there's so much work and time and energy and planning and different parts, and weaving and folding and this dance that goes into creating that. And yeah, the way, like Kelly's saying, the way that you speak about that, I really appreciate it, because it does feel very, it feels like an open, welcoming conversation to have, because I hear you just talking about big themes that are common among all of us around, yeah, who is self? How do I know myself? This need to have that understanding of self before you can make the choices and move on, and move through these life stages, but
mm,
also things that are just um, more generalized than spirituality. These pieces of just storytelling and learning and play and development and growth, and yeah, generation turnover. I just um,
safety,
yeah, I
lots
just
of things. Yeah.
it's just this it just yeah, it's a lot of movement, but in a very very wonderful way that, yeah, makes a lot of sense. Connects from across the world too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Well, okay.
Yeah, I think, when you just say that tapestry, what came to my mind was the image of, drawing from the Indian continent of Indra and Indra's net. And I don't know if that sort of story, but Indra is one of the deities in the Hindu tradition. And Indra casts a net around the world. And it's like, if you think of it like a huge sort of spider's web. I often think of it, and grandmother spider is a big creation entity in a lot of Native American and African traditions. And but each of us is seen as a jewel in Indra's net, and I kind of think of it as this big kind of web in the sky, and like each star, it's like each of us being this jewel, but with this everything is connected, so it's all woven together around the world. And I think, when you mentioned tapestry, that's just how I sort of felt and what I came to my mind. But there's ways of however we want to, whatever language we're using around it, and whoever we want to be, there is this common theme of just something greater than us. And a sense of, yes, that smallness of us compared to what is greater, but that sense of being able to let go and allow, to surrender to what is greater, to understand that there is a great mystery that we cannot understand completely and never will, that there are forces that are moving that can, shape and guide our lives, but, we can't necessarily define them. Or we may, try and define them with certain words and ways of being, but there is this throughout, I think, all religions and spiritual beliefs, that there is something greater than us, guiding us, shaping the world. And to some people that may be more benign than to others. It's, the different practices, different belief systems, have these different ways of, and some religions, as we know, have multiple gods and some have one, and they have different names, but ultimately I think there's that connection of something greater and faith.
Yeah. What you've been speaking to,
Faith that the sun will rise the next morning, and that the stars will be there.
Yes.
Yeah. And beyond that, what other certainties do we have?
Right. Yeah. Before we hit record, we had been kind of talking a little bit about that piece of like looking at the stars or the Milky Way and that feeling of grandeur, of things greater than us, and kind of that piece of feeling very small, but also feeling very connected. And as you were speaking about working with the horses or speaking to a tree, that felt very, very mirrored, right? That whether you have a spiritual connection or not, the horse kind of creates a similar experience, right? It is makes you feel small. It is immediately greater than you and bigger than you, and there are mysteries that we can't figure out about what they're thinking or why they're doing the things they're doing or why this work works. And just in this last moment or two, it had me thinking about that piece of how often in this work the horse itself becomes deified. And it had me curious if there isn't something in that, of that piece of when I'm with this animal, I feel smaller than I feel so small, and I also feel so connected and seen and heard, that I'm really curious if there isn't something in that around why or how that happens.
Oh, we have a
I think there is potentially that, for some people. I mean, the horse, really, it does become this, kind of divine creature, this wisdom people feel, there is a sense created, some people, as we know, have truly profound experiences just being in the presence of a horse. It touches something in them, and whether that's just because they have somatically become present and grounded, and that's and they feel safer because there's a bit of attunement and neuroception there, and then they feel that that allows something within them to come up, to bubble up, or allows that connection with something, their higher self or another wisdom, a guiding kind of spirit or presence, whatever. But it allows, when we see this all the time that something, suddenly there's insight gained
Mhm.
by people. And for some people, that becomes, it is very much like the horses, this almost deified creature that, has created this. And so perhaps people are then handing that power to the horse. And I think that's something that, we can always explore with people. Is it, are we unwilling to accept the power within us and our own thing? Do we need to give that away? Do we feel safer if we are giving power? Just like we might say, well, that's in God's hands. Are we saying this is in the horse's hand? And so what are we owning in that? And does that, give us an opportunity to talk about, our own accountability and responsibility in the world? So, there are ways of, kind of looking at this, but of course we can bring in a lot of the deities, in mythology about horses,
Mhm.
as and horses, have been so mythologized. They have, shaped and inspired and, guided people across. They've been here a lot longer than us, and they've, all these things, Buddha with his white horse, the what so and the Pegasus, who is so often a creature that people think of, or the unicorn,
Mhm.
and what's reflected in the cosmos. We have there Pegasus as a constellation. We have the Monoceros, which is a unicorn kind of thing in the sky. So these things have become mythology. These kind of can become archetypal kind of lessons for people, tapping into an archetypal pattern that connects them to something timeless.
Mm.
And there can be a wisdom and a learning in that. And that can comfort people, that can help people grow. That might explain something to people. And I think our job as equine assisted practitioners is to be open to the client's experience and what they make of it, rather than putting our own beliefs or our own experiences on them. While there are times when we are teaching, maybe things about how to, be with a horse in terms of, touching them or putting a halter on or leading, a horse, or, if we're teaching, which we do with some, particularly children, some competencies around horsemanship, if we're teaching them how to pick up a hoof or something, yes, there are times we're teaching. But other times we are allowing a client to have their own experience. And it's not up to us to judge or shape what they are experiencing. That is, it's up to us to explore their experience with them, to help them to make sense of it, to help them, you know, make sense and or improve, why the thing they came to you for, or to help them live in their life, which may be very troubled, or to help them live, better in a way that, is more regulated emotionally and nervous system wise, for them in an environment that could be quite toxic. So it's not for us to open them all up and make them all vulnerable or feel like the whole world is necessarily a safe, beautiful place and that we are, guided and protected. There are times they might feel like that when they are there with the horses, but that's not their reality in the world in which they're living. And so we also have this duty to sort of make sure that people leave us feeling, protected in whatever way, and in a state that enables them to, return and function in whatever environment they're living in. But if we have had the opportunity to give them that moment, just that little moment of feeling something bigger than themselves, of feeling like there is a sense of connection to something greater, how precious is that? Because that's the moment, we help them to anchor that in their body so that when, things are feeling perhaps pretty overwhelming, or really bad in their outside lives, they can touch into that feeling to resource themselves. I mean, that is a lot of what we are doing in our work with the horses.
I hear so much, yeah, attachment, developmental, relational, spiritual, but also just again, animism, but that the natural world, the scientific parts of this, in what you're speaking of. What's interesting to me is I wonder how, or I guess maybe this is just a question, that we're not giving all the panelists. It's not the one Callie prepared, but I'm curious about how much is just the daily beings or like the daily interactions like intertwined into spirituality for you with the way within the way that you're speaking, I guess. If that's a clear
Mm.
question.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so for me, I can be, going outside, focused on doing something. Let's say it's picking up the manure or weeding or something. But, then I notice the bird song or notice this, and there's that moment of just that connection. And then I'm kind of, oh, hello, because I speak to birds and think I greet everything mostly aloud. But
I'm right
occasionally
there with you,
I
Judy.
occasionally I do it, silently, but usually I'm like, oh, hello, who are you? And what lesson do you have for me today? Or, how can I help you? Because I think it should be reciprocal. I don't want it to all be about what do I need? What can I give to nature? So when I give gratitude for picking the herbs out of my garden, or when I weed, but I'm, grateful for the chance to, connect with the earth. Um, and, when I'm walking around picking up manure, it might be just noticing the sound that the breeze makes through the trees and rustling that and being grateful for that and connecting to that and wondering, oh, you know, I see it's, the breeze is coming from the west, and, that's kind of the element of water in my belief system. And, what does that mean? Or, is that my ancestors or the ancestors of the place speaking, or, this kind of thing. So it can be, in my sense, everything can just have that spiritual connection, just
Mhm,
every little thing.
mhm,
The sense of when, if I'm going for a walk, then and a particular bird comes along or I sight a creature, then I stop and notice, and just spend a moment being present rather than, kind of being focused on a task or being in my head. It's that, the least I can do is give the gift of my presence, but I receive so much from that that it feels like a lovely reciprocal exchange. So
yeah.
I think that's how it sort of shows up on a day to day, with me, and giving, I have moments of, stopping and just creating a sense of gratitude and of making, something like something feels sacred by just the presence, the attention, and the intentionality that I give to the moment. So just like drinking a cup of tea can be a routine thing,
Mhm,
it can become a sacred ritual just by the intention and attention that we give it. So, one of my greatest teachers was the Zen Buddhist Thich Nhat Hanh, and what I learned about, mindfulness really were his teachings. And that moment of just noticing a cloud and noticing that in that cloud I see everything, because that cloud holds the rain, and that rain, fell on this earth and grew this plant and, grew this tea that I am now going to drink, that came along and so forth. So everything is in that cloud, and everything that ever was and will be can be in that cloud.
mhm,
So there is that sense, just at looking at a cloud or drinking a cup of tea, that I can sense that approach it with a sense of reverence
mhm, mhm,
and that
mhm,
sacred intentionality. And I think, that's what when things become sacred, when we hold or touch something with a sacred, like, this is from my heart, and I so appreciate you.
Mm.
And I'm so grateful. And we know, I mean, that's what brings the reverence in for me. And that's, I live alone, so I don't, apart from clients, necessarily have a lot of human contact. And, I teach a lot of grief rituals as well. And I think particularly, so often big things that happen with us need to be witnessed. And this sense that I mentioned earlier, being, having our grief sort of borne witness by nature, sitting, with pouring our grief into a stone and then offering it to a river, to a creek, or to a piece of nature, and just watching your cat coming behind you, is just can help so much, that sense of being witnessed as the trees are around me and the river and the stone, of putting my grief into that and letting it go, the ritual of kind of doing that, but being felt and seen. Or like the same when I might, if I'm grieving, cry out with the horses, and then having the horses just come and stand by me and feeling my grief so witnessed by the horses. These are moments, these are the moments that we can also offer clients, but there is that sense, like, it comes back to that sense of disconnection and isolation that I mentioned earlier. If you kind of approach everything with that sense of reverence, there is a sense of connection. And I think that can, is so missing in the world, and that can help so much. Plus, we know there's so much research now on gratitude and what a difference gratitude makes in people's lives. So whether you're giving gratitude in a church or whether you're giving gratitude in a paddock, I think, this can only be good for us, because it helps us become, to live in a place of, more peace and sense of wonder and sense of connection to something greater. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I mean, it's a strange thing that's happening in my body right now. I have this like great sense of settling, and also just like this feeling of excitement of like, and I think it's probably the things that you're speaking of. I think it's the magic we speak of when we're out in nature with the horses, this piece of being witness, being here and now, sharing breath as they do within horses. Horses share breath to share their spirit and get to know one another. There's a lot to just ponder that I'm excited to ponder about.
And it's so interesting, when there's so many, when so many practices, the breath. I mean, the breath is so important, but of course, just the language that we have on that, to inspire, is to take in spirit, and so forth. So, there is something that is, woven, to use your word, Cait, throughout our being, our very being, our soma, that is spiritual to me. And I think, there's a way of, from a somatic, embodied experience, there are ways of kind of regulating ourselves, and regulation, as you know, is so important to our physical and mental health. And so much of the work that, is happening with the horses, or with, companion animals too, when we're co-regulating and helping people to regulate, so they have got the space within, their nervous system to be able to choose responses rather than react. We regulate. There are, so many, to me, different ways in which we can regulate as well. We regulate, we can eco-regulate, like out in nature. We can co-regulate, like with another being, like, with a horse or a person. We can self-regulate, but we also, we can theo-regulate, in terms of regulating with spirit or with our religious practice, with something bigger than us. There's that level of regulation too. And that to me is also, yes, for me, it's usually tied in with eco-regulation, or, as we spoke before we started recording, Carly, with the sense of going outside and looking up at the stars and something settling in me. It's just that's a regulation, but that to me is both eco and theo. It's a spiritual regulation, because there's this sense, this knowing of something much greater than me. And there's a relief in that, as well as that humbling, that, there is that sense, I can give this to spirit. I can, let go, as they often, say, in some religion, let go and let God. So let go and let spirit, just give this to them, and, because it's greater than me and I can't fix it. So, there is, but there's a great power in that. And I think, this is where, the working with the horses, really kind of brings it, those opportunities in with nature and with the horses, because of their grounding and presencing ability with people, and this sense of being witnessed and regulated, attuned. And then this sense, I've had people who have got, having had a session with the horses, have gone home and, with a young boy who used to come back and tell me that, my ponies were visiting him at night. He saw them in his dreams, or he would say, Marcus flew by my window last night. And I was like, oh, that's great. Isn't that fantastic? He's coming to see you. This belief in his presence. And this was a child who'd had a twin who didn't survive. And he had a great connection with his angel twin. So he was a very spiritual young boy. And so, for him to be visited by my ponies and to be, supported by that, is just beautiful. Yeah.
It's really beautiful.
And I had a mother who was going through a lot of grief and felt, was a single mother and felt very unsupported. And she had one session where it's my lovely big 16 3-hand high horse, that she was with him and just standing with him, and she had her hand on his neck, and she was just, having a very emotional experience. And I asked her, what she was experiencing at one point, and she said she, just felt really supported. She really wanted to lean into him. And I sort of checked in with him and I said, I think, you're fine. Just do that. I think he'll allow that, and he did. And he stood there and she just kind of lent her weight a little bit more into him. And she said afterward, she had never felt so supported in her life and in a long time. And she had realized that she was always the one supporting everybody. But then she sent me an email about a week later, and she said she was off walking to a meeting somewhere, and she was crossing a street in the town where she lived, and there was a tree, a small tree by the crossing, and she suddenly had this sort of feeling that she was going to quite an important, charged sort of meeting, and she felt a bit dizzy and a bit unsupported, and she put her hand onto the tree just to support herself as she waited to cross the road. And she said to me in the email, she said, but it wasn't the bark, it wasn't the tree, it was Thomas, my horse. She said, I felt his skin, it was him, he was there.
No.
Now, if people, you can think what you like about her interpretation of that experience, but that was very real for her. And if that's supportive and helpful to her, which it was, that's what we're here to do.
Yeah.
Important enough to reach out, right? Like I think about the times that I reach out to my providers or those who I'm working with, and it is either when things are so bad that I don't know what to do without help, or so good that I've never experienced it before, or I am so overwhelmed with how cool the experience was that I have to share it with the only people who have seen me in that role, or the only people who might understand that specific thing. And so when I hear stories about people reaching out to share those kinds of things, like that is what I hear is just like the significance and the weight of that moment of if it wasn't super, super impactful, she could have just moved on with her day. But to share that with you shows like the power that it held for her, I think.
Yeah, because it resourced her for her meeting, which was going to be a challenge. And this is, a lot of the work that we're doing. And so I think, just there is a spiritual aspect to that, regardless of how we choose, to interpret it or our own belief system. The fact that, my client chose to interpret it that way,
Mm.
is their choice. And so it's not, I do not want to impose my belief system onto someone else, but I tend to feel into what they're talking about and their language and try and sort of work with that. But again, it comes back to this whole thing of us feeling that we are connected to something more than us, and that there is something, a greater power, that there is some, kind of sense of purpose, which is what a lot of people, are missing. And that's what they come to us for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were sneaking up on kind of the end of the time that we had blocked out for ourselves. But I do want Cait to be able to run this other question by you.
Yeah.
So you can speak to it as much as you want, but it can be as short as you want or need it to as
Okay.
well.
Yeah. And
Great.
I think you've
You've spoken to a lot of it, I think, but I
Mhm.
would love to hear if there's anything else you'd like to that hasn't been included.
Yep. Yeah. But if it's a wrap up, that's okay too.
Yeah.
All right. So why do you feel open discussion around spirituality and equine assisted services is necessary or helpful?
So I think that all of us who work with horses kind of know that there is something bigger going on, something inexplicable, as we have mentioned. And I think a lot of people don't share it because there has been, a very strong push for evidence-based work and practice. And that has come, as the industry has grown, and because of, needing grants and things like that, and, people kind of thinking about regulation of the sector and, a certificate, all these kind of things as the sector has grown. And yes, unfortunately, just the way that modern and Western kind of mental health and everything works, to get grants, you do need to have some evidence base. And so it's important that that work happens. And of course, just as we keep learning more and more on research of horses about horse behavior and ethology, and, which sometimes turns upside down ways that we used to do things or ways that we used to believe. That horses operated. So the same happens here. So yes, evidence-based practice is essential and good. But I think it's also created a sense of like, we can't speak about the other piece because it's too woo. And also because, some people just are not spiritual. They're very secular and they don't feel this and they don't incorporate it and don't want to in their world. And that's fine. We all work with different populations. I think the core thing is, as long as we're not, imposing our beliefs on other people. But I think we need to actually just be a bit more honest about some of the magic and mystery that happens with horses that is inexplicable.
Mhm.
And the fact that spirituality and spiritual work and help, whether it's of a formal religious type or whether it is a more open spiritual belief in the sense, or that mine is, rather than being tied to a particular sort of doctrine or so forth. It's very important in people's mental health and lives. If we're looking at the whole wheel of someone's life, then there is a spiritual aspect to it, and it's there in most people. And while some people will say, no, I don't have anything like that, if you actually started exploring things with them, I think you would find that there was something spiritual about the way that they play golf, or spiritual about the way that they surf. I mean, surfers typically have a very spiritual connection with the ocean. It's so I think it is there, and I think it's a valid conversation to have, and I think we should be less scared of having it. I know people don't want us to be seen as woo and flaky or anything like that, that we're just as people with, some sort of crystal gazing or, whatever. There's a lot of things that just, are kind of not accepted as, kind of good practice, particularly in the mental health space. And so I know we can't make these bold claims, nor should we, about what the horses can do or would do, because that's not fair on the horses. The horses will do what they want to and feel they need to do in the time, So, but there's room to talk about some of the mystery that happens, I think. Because I think it's also very helpful to people when we live. I mean, Australia is a very secular, country, and a lot of places where this work is going on are very secular. And I think there are people struggling with that secularity and actually looking for some meaning. So I think it's important.
Judy, I can't thank you enough for having this conversation with us today. We've been excited about it for months. And I think truly, Judy, and I think everything that you've spoken to has such an incredible value. And just on a personal level, some of what you're speaking to, right? That struggle with feeling disconnected, or that struggle with feeling that source of connectedness that we typically do. Those are things I've been struggling with a little bit lately. And sometimes that question will come up of what do you need to fix that? And I sometimes don't know I have no clue. We were talking about it in a different context, but we were talking about sometimes reassurance doesn't have to be a big gesture. Sometimes reassurance can be a couple of words of connection, or it can just be sharing something vulnerably, or feeling heard or seen.
Being witnessed.
Yeah. And personally, this conversation has given me such a great amount of reassurance and settling in those pieces that I already know for myself, but also those pieces that I've been questioning, or those pieces that I've been struggling to see in myself or others as much lately. And so I just really want to thank you for such a connective and beautiful conversation, because I think that can be a very spiritual thing as well. I've had chills for so much of this conversation that I think that is what was really demonstrated for me. So,
yeah, I echo what Kelly's saying, and I think this whole conversation to me really it answers that second question. I think it's incredibly important just to have conversations, just to feel safe enough to have curiosity, to listen, to hear, to question, to be questioned, and to answer. It's so important because that's what allows us to make meaning, to make choice, to make action. And I feel very grateful. Yeah, grateful for this time that we've been able to share because you're doing amazing work. You're all across the world. And so I just feel very grateful to have shared this time with you and with Callie and to get to share this with others.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think gratitude is, kind of, the thing here. I'm grateful to you too for considering doing this, which I think is a courageous thing to do. And so I honor you both. And yeah, lovely to share this time with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judy.
Take care.
Bye.